on the tough issues and provide a biblical perspective to them. The topics we cover are wide-ranging: apologetics, theology, prophecy, creation and evolution, intelligent design, marriage, family, child-rearing, the millennial generation, trends in society, politics, economics, business, religious liberty, the Constitution, public policy, foreign policy, military policy, tensions in the Middle East, abortion, homosexuality, pornography, sexual ethics, media, technology, history, and America's godly heritage. We talk about anything that affects your faith, your family, or your freedom. So don't go anywhere, because Point of View starts right now.
Across America, live, this is Point of View. And now, Kerby Anderson.
Thank you for joining me today here on Point of View. We'd love to hear from you today, and we're going to spend some time looking at a number of different issues, but I thought it might be fun just to start off with something a little more enjoyable. We, of course, today will be talking about some of the collusion discussions, certainly the Mueller investigation, the firing of Andrew McCabe. There's a case before the Supreme Court having to do with free speech and pro-life issues. You have Louis Gohmert, who will be with us later this week, who believes that some of these individuals should be jailed because of the FISA warrant, and then all sorts of data from Facebook that ended up in the wrong spots, and now even senators calling for some of these tech CEOs to appear before the Judiciary Committee. So lots to talk about. But I thought we'd talk about movies for just a minute, because if you have not seen the movie, I Can Only Imagine, you might be in the minority. It turned out to be unbelievably successful. Now, let's put it in perspective. Of course, number one this weekend was Black Panther. No surprise there. This has been a perennial favorite. It continues to do well each week and actually blow away any attempt to unseat it. 27 million. And then, of course, the new film, Tomb Raider, 23 million, but that was kind of disappointing given what they were expecting out of this sort of rebooting of the Tomb Raider. But nevertheless, that was number two. But number three, I Can Only Imagine. Now, you got to put this in perspective. This is a Christian film. It is based upon the story of one of the lead singers for Mercy Me. And it is, of course, based upon how his life led him to eventually write and then perform perhaps the most successful Christian single ever, I Can Only Imagine. And so it is a wonderful film. It's done by the Irwin brothers, and we've talked about them before here on the program, but I'm very excited about these two brothers, the Kendrick brothers in Atlanta, of course, the Irwin brothers right in this area where we broadcast from. And it was produced by them, or directed by them, and then the producers, Roadside Attractions, which I think is kind of interesting. Right now, this will probably be the most successful film for Roadside. Their biggest title up until now was Manchester by the Sea. But you have a film that many people would have thought might have done about 3 million or more in the box office, did 17 million. And those are preliminary numbers. I suspect those numbers will go up even by tomorrow when it's added up. The budget for the film was only 7 million, so they made their money back in the first day. Which is pretty amazing. And I happened to attend a church where Mercy Me actually performed, I Can Only Imagine, and gave a little bit of the testimony. And then we also had John Irwin, who is one of the Irwin brothers, actually speak to this, and they're just in shock. They were hoping for a good response. They did not expect one this good. Beating out A Wrinkle in Time with Oprah Winfrey, and, of course, many of these other films that have come out, Game Night, Peter Rabbit, Red Sparrow, all the way down the list. And so this is, I think, good news for a number of things. First of all, it means that now the Irwin brothers probably will be financially stable and can do anything they want with the next set of films, and I know they will be very definitely Christian-oriented films. It's good news for Hollywood because it's just one more way to send a signal that the American people, especially Christian audience, but this is going to be one that's going to attract a lot more than a Christian audience, want these kinds of films. And this is something else, because this rollout of the film was only in 1,600 screens, which sounds like a lot, but it's nothing like these other films we're talking about. The average amount per screen was $10,000, which means it does better in each one of the theaters than even the Black Panther did. So that is kind of intriguing to see that play itself out. And, of course, you know that now because of its success, it will roll out into more theaters. And I would imagine word of mouth will work very well as well. So before we get on to some of these other issues, let me open up the phones. I don't know if any of you have seen the film. I can only imagine. I'd love to get a comment or two from you, because I certainly was very impressed with how it was put together. And Dennis Quaid, who we all love, has to kind of play a real bad guy in this case, because he's the mean, vindictive, angry father who eventually, of course, becomes a Christian and changes his personality. And that's one of the reasons, of course, behind this particular song. And I don't want to give all of it away, although it's pretty well known because the book is out almost every time Mercy Me speaks. Before they sing, they tell some of the story. So anyway, that's kind of one of those issues that is available. But if you'd like to join us, I'd love to know if you've seen the film, I Can Only Imagine, and what your thoughts are, whether you're going to recommend it to your friends. So again, that number, 800-351-1212, 800-351-1212. And just one more way of sending a signal to Hollywood. And just before we take our first break here today, let me mention that this study that was done just recently, there's a group called Movie Guide, and the head of that has been on this program with us before. They went through and they produced a report for 2018 on the films in 2017. And I guess I could maybe make a screenshot of this and send it up later, or maybe I'll put it on our Facebook page or something like that. But if you look at three categories, they first look at films that have a very strong Christian theme or redemptive or moral content. And if you look at those, they look at the average per movie domestic box office receipts in millions, and that's 57 million. So think of that as more than 50 million. That's an easy way to remember. It's 57.84 million. Then if you look at those who have a very strong non-Christian content, 10 million. So you can see 5 times better that when you have the Christian theme or some kind of moral content. And then if you go to one more category, looking at those that have a very strong secular or humanistic or atheistic content, 1 million. So you can see that right now, Hollywood, if they were just interested in profits alone, and they are, but they also are interested in producing some of these sort of art house types of films, ones where they get pats on the back for being edgy, ones that have the greatest chance of being nominated for an Academy Award. They will still produce some of these films that do poorly. I mean, do not just badly, but very badly, poorly, dismally. Find the adjective you want to use. But they'll produce those and in many cases lose money. Imagine if you only make $1 million on a film and you spend $7 million or $10 million or $20 million on it, you can see that you're losing a lot of money. Likewise, let's take I Can Only Imagine, where they spent $7 million. They've already brought in $17 million and a lot more to come. And the average for these ones that have a very strong Christian theme or a very strong redemptive or moral content, 57 million. So this, I think, illustrates again that some of those individuals in Hollywood, and there are Christians in Hollywood, no doubt about it, but most of these studios are run by individuals with a very secular kind of outlook. They will sometimes begrudgingly do one that's sort of Christian themed, but they really are producing films that hurt themselves in the box office. And you can look down the list of all these other films that did worse than I Can Only Imagine, and some of them indeed have been very expensive.
and are certainly not doing that well at the box office. So if nothing else, love to get your comments. If you had a chance to see I Can Only Imagine, we're going to move on and get into some other issues, but I'd love to hear from you. 1-800-351-1212. We'll be right back.
This is Viewpoints with Kerby Anderson.
This weekend, students will hold demonstrations demanding gun control legislation. As I've said in previous commentaries, these young people have every right to express their views. And since they are making their arguments in the public arena, we have every right to discuss, debate, and correct what they say. Jonah Goldberg, writing in USA Today, focuses on a broader concern. We seem to be resurrecting an old American tradition of celebrating young people as inherently wiser and more moral than adults. He adds that this is an ancient confusion for a number of reasons. First, we celebrate that young people see the world with fresh eyes. In some ways, that is a plus because they cut through some of the fictions of modern life. We all remember the story of the emperor's new clothes. The child didn't understand you were supposed to placate the king's vanity. The other side of that is that young people are not as a group wiser and better informed than older people. You can prove that with lots of social science research, but Jonah Goldberg has a simple test in the form of a question. Were you wiser and smarter when you were half your current age? I doubt very many people would answer in the affirmative. Some of the student leaders blame the previous generation for the problems they face. Again, they are free to do so, but they ignore the many blessings they have inherited. Former President Barack Obama put it this way: if you had to choose a moment in time to be born, any time in human history, and you didn't know ahead of time what nationality you were, or what gender or your economic status might be, you'd choose today. This weekend, when the students take to podiums to criticize politicians, corporations, and the previous generation, they might also want to express some gratitude for the freedom and opportunities available to each of them. I'm Kerby Anderson, and that's my point of view.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment, I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Now playing. More information at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
You're listening to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Back once again, let me see if I can, for just a few minutes, spend some time trying to talk about this firing of Andrew McCabe. First of all, I haven't spent a lot of time dealing with some of the issues related to the FBI, the justice investigation, collusion, and all the rest for a couple of reasons. First of all, we don't know all the facts, and even as we know some of the facts, it is a little bit confusing, and it brings me back to kind of one of the philosophies I've used here at Point of View. We're all about the things that affect your faith, your family, and your freedom. Now, how much does it matter to your faith, your family, or your freedom whether Andrew McCabe was fired a couple of days ago or allowed to at least stay in the Justice Department until Sunday and collect his pension? Did that affect you at all? Of course not. It didn't affect you at all. The only way it affects you is whether or not it sends a signal to some of the people in the Justice Department, some of the people in the FBI, as to whether or not they will be punished for wrongdoing, but it really doesn't affect you too much. But because I also want you to be a wise consumer of the media, I want to read just a little bit from some of the pieces we've posted. The first one is on our website dealing with that. And interestingly enough, Al Perota said, you know, when asked by a reporter to comment on angry insults by a competitor, he says, a wise old boss of mine simply said, when you fire into a bush and you hear a scream, you know you've hit something.
Those of us in Texas have heard the old phrase that if you throw a rock into a pack of dogs, the one that yelps is the one that got hit. Well, you can use illustration you want to use, but those are just a couple of ideas. But you've heard a lot of screaming this weekend about the decision to fire the former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. If you've listened to this program any length of time, we point out that there's all sorts of questions about his behavior. But I think the simple thing is that why has there been so much hue and cry about this? Well, one, because it does allow individuals who are anti-Trump to say, well, here's a good example of Donald Trump or Jeff Sessions of just trying to push their agenda. As we'll find out in just a minute as I read a couple of pieces here, that's not what it is. So that's maybe a little of it. But the biggest one, I think, comes, interesting enough, from Sarah Carter. She's been involved very much in doing some of the investigations of the FISA report and the FISA applications, which allow them to spy on the Trump campaign and the rest. And she said that Andrew McCabe had said for months, if I go down, I'm taking everyone with me. Now, that also comes from some other people as well. Fox News reporter Adam Housley also told him something similar. So this is something to be watching over the next couple of days. Now that he's been fired, what does that mean? Now, there's been a lot been made about the fact that he's taken some notes and he's passed them on to Robert Mueller. We'll see where that goes. But anyway, on Friday night, the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, fired him. And he was acting on the actual recommendation, not of the president, Donald Trump, not even of some of the people that Donald Trump has put into office, but actually what's called the Department of Justice's Office of Professional Responsibility. And the piece that I've posted here by Al Perota, you'll really appreciate this, because he says that this is an apolitical office of professional responsibility, and usually the chances that that office would want someone fired is about the same as a 16 seed beating a number 1 seed during March Madness. Okay, that happened this weekend, so every once in a while the stars align, and even the Office of Professional Responsibility decided he needed to be fired, which tells you everything you really need to know. This is an office that probably would have done anything maybe to protect its own. So when they are recommending that this guy has got to go, what's that? Well, again, it was because of what's called unauthorized leaking and making many misleading statements to investigators. Now, of course, you've seen the Twitter post if you've gone out on Twitter. I don't recommend it, by the way. It just can ruin your breakfast, your lunch, or your dinner, or all of the above. James Comey, of course, got a book coming out, and he says, Mr. President, the American people will hear my story very soon, and they can judge for themselves who is honorable and who is not. And then John Brennan has said, you know, this is an example. You tried to scapegoat Andrew McCabe, and so we'll see where that all goes. But there's all sorts of back and forth. John Brennan, James Comey, Samantha Power. I won't even read all of those, but you can read them, and we've posted them on our website, pointofview.net. But then Alperto makes this comment. He says, those old enough to remember Watergate remember how Republicans in Congress worked in a bipartisan manner with Democrats to ferret out the corruption and abuses of power. But that's long gone. It's as old as 8-track tapes. A lot of great lines in here, by the way. So then you even have Adam Schiff. Now, Adam Schiff is kind of the ranking Democrat in the House Intelligence Committee. He is one that has been very critical of the president, you think? He's been very critical of Sessions. He's been very critical of the Republicans and on and on. But even on Sunday, on the Talking Head shows yesterday, contended and acknowledged that the firing of Andrew McCabe may be justified. He said it was a decision that was tainted because McCabe is a witness in the Mueller investigation. But it's sort of the way of saying, and I like what Al Perot puts it here, sure, he lied to investigators when questioned. How dare he be used against him when he questioned by investigators? And, of course, the concern that a lot of people are raising right now is if he wasn't fired, it might send a signal to others that, you know, you can lie with impunity and there's no consequences to it. But, of course, some people have been very concerned that if he had just worked a few more days, he would have gotten a pension. So Andrea Mitchell had this in her tweet. One suggestion from a McCabe supporter, if a friendly member of Congress hired him for a week, he could possibly qualify for pension benefits by extending his service the extra days. So instantaneously, one of the members of Congress said, give me a call. I could probably use a good 2-day report on the biggest crime families in Washington, D.C., And so Al says, please do, Congressman. Then explain to voters why you hired a white male of privilege who lied to federal investigators over an honest woman of color, or hired McCabe over former supervisor agent Robin Gritz, whose career was destroyed by McCabe after she complained of sexual harassment, and then goes on to point out that there are some other issues involved with Andrew McCabe, which, again, if you just watch maybe CNN or MSNBC, you won't hear about. Might not even hear about it with ABC, NBC, CBS. Let's hope at least somebody, maybe Fox News, maybe not, will cover some of this as well. But it brings us back to the bigger issue I wanted to identify, and something to pay attention to as you are watching these news reports over the next couple of days. Because he ends his piece by saying, so why the frantic, full-out defense of Andrew McCabe? Well, it should be a simple matter. If an FBI agent is caught lying, he gets fired. McCabe was caught lying, so the Office of Professional Responsibility recommended he be fired. End of story. So why, as we mentioned, the Obama administration officials have to go on the attack because McCabe was threatening to bring down everyone with him. But even if McCabe doesn't do it, time will. Drip by drip, day by day, more proof emerges how widespread the effort to clear, first of all, Hillary Clinton email scandal, and destroy Donald Trump after his election. Those guilty cannot have the American people believing the revelations are anything more than politically motivated. They have to start spoiling the waters now. So that gives you a little bit of the sense there. And again, we have a lot more taking place. We have, of course, the firing of Andrew McCabe. We also have him now saying that he has private notes. Now, it's been interesting to see the tweet storm that came from the president about that, because he said, I never saw him taking notes in my presence in the few times we met, so those were taken later. Then you have the response by some of the loyalists in the Justice Department, many of which were put there by President Barack Obama. And then, of course, you have the Inspector's General report, which has not been disclosed, but probably will be soon, about an investigation that began before Donald Trump had come to office, and so those are all some of those important issues that need to take place. And, of course, the more serious scandal that Kevin McCullough in his piece points out is what seems to be the covering up of criminal behavior, the illicit manipulation of the FISA process, and an attempt to undo some of the things that happened in the election. So when we come back, we've looked at why all the reaction from those who are in the Justice Department or in the bureaucracy or in what's called the deep state. What about the reaction from the president? This would have been a time when if you could just get to the president and say, don't say anything. But that didn't happen, and the Wall Street Journal has some comments about that as well. So I wanted to spend just another few minutes when we come back from the break talking about this. Again, it doesn't affect your faith, your family, your freedom, so this is why we don't spend every day talking about this. But it will help you, I think, be a wise consumer of what is happening in the media. And over the next couple of days, Andrew McCabe will be portrayed as a person who was shoved out because Donald Trump ordered his ouster, or that Jeff Sessions thought he was getting too close to the truth. Nothing is further from the truth, as evidenced by the fact that the Office of Professional Responsibility recommended that, and I do love Al Perota's line. That happens about as often as a 16 seed beating a number 1 seed. And if you're not familiar with that, just look up Virginia basketball, March Madness. You'll know what I'm talking about. We'll be right back.
From Irwin Brothers Entertainment comes I Can Only Imagine. The untold true story of Mercy Me's Bart Millard and the power of redemption and forgiveness.
My dad was a monster, and I saw God transform him. I didn't think that God could do that.
I Can Only Imagine. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. Now playing. More information is available at ICanOnlyImagine.com.
When you listen to the news, do you ever feel like you're living on a different planet from those presenting the headlines? We've always known there was a subtle bias, but today, it's about as subtle as stepping off a 1,000-foot cliff. The only way to counteract that bias is with the truth. to join the Truth Team at Point of View. Your support will educate and encourage potentially millions every day. Don't let lies win. Step up so that lives and our nation can be changed. Join the team at pointofview.net/team or call 800-347-5151. pointofview.net/team and 800-347-5151. Point of View will continue after this.
You are listening to Point of View. The opinions expressed on Point of View do not necessarily reflect the views of the management or staff of this station. And now, here again
is Kerby Anderson.
Continue your conversation today, 1-800-351-1212. Talked a little bit about the incredible showing of the film I Can Only Imagine, $17 million and more to come. It's going to be doing very well. You might have heard some of the spots as well, and maybe we'll spend a little bit more time later in the week talking about how it's doing and how I'm sure it will roll out to more screens. This last weekend, 1,600 screens. And again, an average of $10,000 per screen, which actually made per theater better than even Black Panther. Talking for a few more minutes about the firing of Andrew McCabe. If you go to our website, pointofview.net, you'll see that article. Let me read just a couple more, and we'll move on to another article we've posted on freedom of speech and pregnancy centers. That's a case going before the Supreme Court tomorrow. But as I pointed out, you, of course, have the firing of Andrew McCabe, the fact that he had private notes that he passes on to Robert Mueller. You have all sorts of reaction to this as well. And a lot of this has to do with an attempt, I believe, to cover over what Kevin McCullough refers to as, quote, the Democrats' illicit partnership with the Obama Justice Department and what appears to be increasingly corrupted leadership at the Federal Bureau of Investigation was yet one more logical hurdle that President Trump would have to overcome in his surprising and transformative win, unquote. Now, that doesn't mean that all of the agents are corrupt. As a matter of fact, as we've talked about this before, if we're talking about problems, probably happens mostly up there on the 7th floor. But the fact that Andrew McCabe was fired isn't due to some kind of pressure brought by the president, although he probably would agree with that for sure, or even the decision arbitrarily by the Attorney General, Jeff Sessions, but probably also has to do with the fact that we have, as we mentioned a minute ago, this Office of Professional Responsibility that recommended he be fired. So he was. Now, interestingly enough, we can begin to see some other things as well, because this also brings us back to some of the things that Louis Gohmert has said, and he'll be on the program later in the week, in which he says it's good that Andrew McCabe has been fired, but James Comey and some of these others, maybe they should even go into prison. And this has to do with the fact that, for example, when James Comey was investigating the whole question about the email scandal, did not require that Hillary Clinton testify under oath, but instead simply granted, quote, an interview. Of course, later, we've all discovered that Hillary Clinton's campaign, their operation paid for opposition research on Donald Trump, then candidate Donald Trump, that included the hiring of a disgraced British ex-spy, also a law firm associated with Hillary Clinton, and a collection of accusations in this so-called dossier that, first of all, are false and apparently originated originally from Russian sources. Then you can go on, as Kevin McCullough does in his article here. He says, quote, enter the illicit relationship between Agent Strzok and Page. These are the two, by the way, were having an affair at the time. And the fact that from the before election night to well afterwards, it appears a coordinated effort to undo the election results were thought to be a backstop by then Deputy Director Andrew McCabe. And you have the elements leading to the investigation into all of that willfully leaked information. By the way, Kevin McCullough says, a crime in and of itself, to the press, then slanted in a decidedly pro-Hillary and anti-Trump direction. He goes on to say, shuffle into the mix Loretta Lynch, meeting with Bill Clinton on the tarmac, Dr. Susan Rice penning an imaginative record of the president instructing investigators to play it by the book, which was written after the fact to sort of maybe protect her. And then, of course, you have James Comey penning what should be considered classified and protected notes of conversation he had with the new president, and then giving them to people outside the government. And then this weekend, Deputy Director Andrew McCabe admitting to evidently employing a similar practice, which we'll be hearing about as well. And so a lot of this goes all the way back to the recommendations from this particular Inspector General investigation. We haven't seen the report, but we'll see it soon enough. One more point, and then I'll move on, is from the Wall Street Journal today. And the editors put it this way. They said, for a microcosm of the current madness of American politics, look no further than the weekend meltdown after Attorney General Jeff Sessions fired former FBI Deputy Director Andrew McCabe late Friday. Mr. Sessions acted on a recommendation by the FBI's own Office of Professional Responsibility. We've just talked about that. But Democrats in the media ignored that and called the firing part of Donald Trump's plot to undermine the FBI and steal American democracy. It's so out of character, I suppose, but nevertheless, that's what we see, and it's certainly off target. Mr. Trump then seemingly tried to confirm the accusations with a Twitter fuselage hailing Mr. McCabe's firing and escalating without cause to attack special counsel Robert Mueller, which triggered another round of claims that Trump's days in office are numbered or should be. As Mr. Trump and his antagonists drive each other insane, it's hard to keep your eye on what matters. Start with the obligation of FBI agents to tell the truth. Mr. Sessions' statement was a straightforward explanation that he fired Mr. McCabe for a serious violation of duty. And the Inspector General talked about allegations of misconduct. You can go through all of this as well. And again, don't forget that this is the Office of Professional Responsibility that, as stated, all FBI employees know that lacking candor under oath results in dismissal and that our integrity is at our brand. In other words, Mr. McCabe had to be fired. And the report remains secret, but it hopefully will be made available shortly. And in response to all this, I haven't mentioned Andrew McCabe's response. He said, quote, "I answered questions truthfully and as accurately as I could amidst the chaos that surrounded me, and when I thought my answers were misunderstood, I contacted investigators to correct them." He went on to add, I to be accused of lacking candor when at worst I was distracted in the midst of chaotic events is incredibly disappointing and unfair. But the rest of the statement, it just illustrates again his desire to attack Donald Trump, this administration's ongoing war on the FBI and efforts of the special counsel investigation. But as the editors of the Wall Street Journal point out, Andrew McCabe knows that these lawyers aren't Trump partisans, and its director was appointed by Robert Mueller himself when he was running the FBI in 2004. I went into that in probably more detail than most would want to know, but it's just, again, a reminder that just because you hear on the media, and you will over the next couple of days, the reason that the former Deputy Director Andrew McCabe was fired is because Donald Trump is trying to prevent the investigation going forward, or is trying to discredit the FBI, is to not look at the facts the way we need to look at them. And so there is some great material. It's available on the website. You can read it if you would like. Let me move on to another issue, though, just before we have another break, and that is that tomorrow the Supreme Court is going to look at a very important case. And if you listen to Point of View any length of time, we oftentimes talk about freedom of speech. We talk about freedom of religion. As a matter of fact, oftentimes on Friday, we have whole sections where we focus on the issue of religious liberty. But there's a bigger issue, and that's just what I might call freedom of speech. And the first part of the First Amendment gets into that very important issue because, as I have posted a column by George Will, he points out that the Supreme Court will have to, it just must, strike down a California law that compels these pro-life pregnancy centers from actually posting information that they disagree with and are actually contrary to their message. If you're not familiar, these pregnancy resource centers are owned and operated oftentimes with people from religious concerns about this. There are licensed ones that actually have pregnancy testing, ultrasound examinations, medical referrals, vitamins, and the rest. There are some that are unlicensed as well that offer non-medical services like a self-administered pregnancy test, parenting preparation, baby clothes, diapers, and all the rest. But the key is this. The state of California basically has compelled licensed centers to provide free advertisements for government-provided abortions. And then the government compels the unlicensed centers to say, in large fonts, in as many as 13 languages, even on their own websites, that they do not have medical providers that the government itself says, by not requiring them to be licensed, are not necessary for the services they provide. And I can read the actual statement, but basically what they are forcing these pro-life groups to do is to advertise for abortion in a pro-life pregnancy center. And the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals, and I love how George Will puts it, whose reasoning is frequently novel and whose rulings are frequently reversed, actually upheld that the California law can regulate the practice of speech of professionals. But I love how he turns that around. Suppose that a pro-life state government were to require all publicly and privately funded abortion providers to advertise on their premises the locations and services of crisis pregnancy centers, of these pro-life pregnancy centers, and even post information that after 18 days after conception, the unborn baby's brain begins to form. After 3 weeks, the heart begins to beat. You know that they would react against that. And so sometimes the best way to think through an issue is turn it around. And when you do, you can see that the Supreme Court has to strike down these laws. We'll take a break, come back with more right after this.
Welcome to the First Liberty Briefing. I'm Jeremy Dice. 2 school boards in Arkansas were told to stop opening their meetings with prayer. Of course, the advice came not from their attorneys or the community the boards represent, but from a secularist group that just doesn't like prayer in public. We have covered the issue of legislative prayer often on the First Liberty Briefing. By now you know that public and legislative prayer has not only been a long-standing part of our country's history and tradition, it has at least twice been upheld by the Supreme Court of the United States. And earlier in 2017, the United States Court of Appeals for the Fifth Circuit gave its approval to school boards opening meetings with prayer. Perhaps these school boards in Arkansas should consider the words of Chief Justice Berger writing for the majority in the 1983 case of Marsh v. Chambers. Quote, "It can hardly be thought that in the same week members of the First Congress voted to appoint and to pay a chaplain for each house and also voted to approve the draft of the First Amendment for submission to the states, that they intended the Establishment Clause of the amendment to forbid what they had just declared acceptable." Unquote. County commissions, city councils, and school boards across America, don't be afraid to pray like the members of the First Congress. To learn how First Liberty is protecting religious liberty for all Americans, visit firstliberty.org.
You can learn how to protect religious freedom in the workplace, public schools, your church, the military, and more by downloading First Liberty's free Religious Liberty Protection Kits at firstliberty.org. That's firstliberty.org. If you want hope for religious freedom, go to firstliberty.org.
Now, back to Point of View, your listener-supported source for truth.
Let me just mention real quickly, if you'd like some of the articles that we are quoting from today, and I think that these are very helpful because sometimes I go through this very quickly and you said, I'd like to read that again, or I know somebody that maybe has been saying around the water cooler at Starbucks or on Facebook that this whole firing of Andrew McCabe is due to, again, Trump trying to prevent the investigation of Russian collusion or whatever, and you'd like to say, well, I've heard some other things that you might want to look at. So, again, we've posted some of these articles, one on the firing of Andrew McCabe, one that I just mentioned a minute ago, the piece by George Will, Freedom of Speech and Pregnancy Centers. And then I want to get into the Russian attack briefly, because it's not, again, something that's a huge story, but it's one that I thought would be helpful for you to know about, and that has to do with the Russian attack on the energy grid. And so, again, if you find yourself wanting some more information on some of those issues, it's all available at our website, pointofview.net. This one from CNN, and that is the United States government has accused Russia of remotely targeting the U.S. power grid as part of its newly unveiled sanctions on the country. This comes from the Department of Homeland Security. It released details last week about a multi-stage effort by Russia to target specific government entities and the crucial and critical infrastructure. And then they went on to say that Russia has attempted to attack targets that include energy, nuclear, commercial facilities, water, aviation, and critical manufacturing sectors. That comes from the Department of Homeland Security. And if you say, well, this is rather unusual, actually it's not. 2015, Ukraine experienced unprecedented cyber attacks on its electric grid from Russia, and this led to widespread power outages, and the attack raised questions about the vulnerabilities at that time of the U.S. system, and we now know that's the case. This is a piece that we have here from The Hill, and in The Hill, it's 5 things to know about Russian attacks on the energy grid. In the interest of time, I'll go through them fairly quickly, but it's something to pay attention to. There have been some that have said, maybe are convinced that we're going to have some kind of cataclysm. We've had John Whitehead on this program suggesting that even some government officials wonder if there will be a time when there may be an economic downturn, and then we might see some kind of civil war or conflict in the streets. Of course, there are some that are believing something's going to hit the fan, and it's going to be a lot worse than that. But wherever you are on this, we've also talked about a possibility of an electromagnetic pulse that would break down the grid or other kind of cyber hacking. This announcement is causing some people to say, maybe I'd get a solar panel. Maybe I'd get a generator. Maybe I'd just do something just to cover for that. But here are the 5 things we do know about the Russian cyber attack, and you can read this in its entirety in our website, pointofview.net, or you can go to thehill.com, which is the, again, journalistic record for Congress. So this is not some conspiracy website. This is one that is actually used to inform members of Congress about what is happening on Capitol Hill, which is why it's called The Hill. Well, the first is that there was a multi-stage intrusion campaign. What do they mean by that? Well, these Russian government hackers conducted kind of a multi-stage campaign in which they tried to go at different levels to see what they could do. So they wanted to try to hack into the government, into energy-producing sectors, nuclear, water, aviation, critical manufacturing. And so the first thing we hear from the Department of Homeland Security is that it was a multi-stage intrusion. Number 2, the Russians accessed information on the industrial control systems. Once inside, they were in, say, the energy sector networks. The hackers then moved laterally to gain information on what's called the industrial control systems and the supervisory control and data acquisition systems, which means that eventually they could control them. They could know how to turn on energy, turn it off. Open a valve, close a valve, all sorts of things, and that was of great concern. Number 3, the security community warned about this activity last year. Many of you, perhaps on your computer, have some kind of antivirus software. Well, one of those is produced by a group called Symantec. And Symantec released a report last September detailing a cyber attack campaign against the energy sector in Europe and North America, which was tied to a cyber espionage group called Dragonfly. It sounds like something out of some kind of action thriller. And a group also known as Energetic Bear. Where's the bear? That's, of course, the Russian bear. So you've also had independent verification from groups like Symantec. Number 4, Homeland Security blamed Russia for the attacks, and that's significant because, as some people have pointed out, and I'm reading this quote here, quote, it's highly unusual, not unprecedented, but highly unusual when the government provides the type of attack attribution like they have in this particular alert. And that comes from one of these experts who is the founding director of the Homeland Security's Computer Emergency Readiness Team. So usually that's strong a signaling statement between governments when that happens. So it's kind of a way of saying, we know you did it, we know who did it, we know what you're trying to do, and we are disturbed about it. And number 5, cyber threats to the energy grid and infrastructure run high. That is, former hackers have previously launched cyber attacks against critical infrastructure. The Justice Department, as a matter of fact, indicted 7 Iranian hackers in 2016. You might remember that about 2 years ago, for conducting and actually various kinds of denial of service attacks against the United States financial system, and even trying to shut down a New York dam. So you can see that this is something that the government seems to be taking seriously. And if you'd like to read more about it, that is one of the other articles we've posted on the website, pointofview.net. So again, we have these 3 articles. Let me encourage you to find them. One on the firing of Andrew McCabe, one on the whole issue of freedom of speech. This will be the case going before the Supreme Court. And if you're in the pro-life movement, there are more pregnancy resource centers in America than there are abortion clinics. And so this has been an attempt by more liberals in the state of California to shut down these pregnancy centers, to compromise them, to frustrate them. And then one that I ended with as well, 5 things to know about the Russian attacks on the energy grid. And this all goes together with some of the other things Russia has been doing, because you have the attempted murder of Sergei Skripal in the UK. You have some other individuals, for example, that have been killed, one killed on a bridge near the Kremlin, and a variety of other attacks, some successful, some not as successful, against individuals who were seen as defectors or hostile in one way or another to Vladimir Putin, which once again brings us back to the fact that really one of the most dangerous countries in the world, apart from China, is also Russia, and to pay attention to that as well. We're going to take a break. When I come back on the second hour here, we'll do a little bit of review of some of these topics, but then Rachel Alexander will be with us. She wants to talk about the opposition to the idea of having a military parade. The argument always is, well, only dictators have military parades. No, the United States had a military parade after Desert Storm, or Desert Shield, I guess it was. We'll go through the list of all sorts of countries that don't have dictators and are actually functioning democracies that occasionally have a military parade, but we'll see how that plays out. And we've got all sorts of things to cover in the next couple hours. But first of all, let me encourage you to go to our website, pointofview.net, find those 3 articles, use them effectively. And if you don't mind, as you go by there, might click on that button that says donate. If you leave a donation of any size, we would greatly appreciate it. Love to send you some more information about Point of View, and so feel free to go to the website, pointofview.net. Let's take a break. We'll continue our conversation. All that coming up right after these important messages.
From PureFlix comes God's Not Dead, a light in darkness. Even in life's darkest valleys, a small flame can light the way toward healing and hope.
We are called to be a light in the darkness.
Starring David A.R. White and John Corbett.
God's Not Dead,
God's Not Dead, a light in darkness. Rated PG. Parental guidance suggested. In theaters March 30th. More information is available at godsnotdead.com.
Christians are called to have answers. Answers for those who doubt our faith, and answers for those going through difficult times. Thanks to our Truth Team members, Point of View provides those answers. You can play a vital role in bringing truth to the pressing issues of our day, and truth when life doesn't seem fair. Help shine a light in darkness by giving today. Call 800-347-5151 or visit pointofview.net/team. Do not miss or minimize how much of a difference you can make. Take just a couple of minutes and join the Truth Team. 800-347-5151 and pointofview.net/team. Point of View will continue after this.
I just want to thank you so much for all the wonderful programming you have. You're just absolutely fantastic.
I recently started listening to Point of View, and I really found it interesting because of the different subjects you cover. Thank you for that.
I really appreciate everything that you do.